Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 751 Tower Foundations. Seth stared in awe at the result of Evie's undead slaving away for weeks. She called it the foundation of a magic tower, but from above it looked more like she was growing a citadel of doom. The mentioned foundation of the tower was a star fort built from black granite. Similar to Minas Mar, it was built half into the mountain wall, with 5 points of the star pointing towards the canyon in the distance. There was a second, even higher, wall, parallel to the outer walls, and in its center was the foundation for the magic tower, as well as the teleport hub. Both were right above a crossing of 3 dragon veins that accumulated power in this region. Of course, she had shown them the plans, but seeing it in person was again something different. Seth and the field teams had come ahead of time, while the rest of Minas Mar was working on organizing the teams that would get the chance to enter the Holy Land. The blacksmith had taken to the sky on the back of Puffles, to take a look at the surroundings. The reason was that he had the sight of Thea. Not only could he easily scout out the monster army the Immortal Witch had described, but also look for the source that caused the instability of the teleport passage. Evie had found the reason why home call did not work in the Holy Land. Someone had placed a net of space-locking formations across the canyon and its surroundings. Taking into account the previous incidents, the Maestro was the most likely culprit. Since these formations were hard to find, Evie was not able to find all the ones in the vicinity of their construction area. This led to disturbances when connected to the outside. For the sake of smoother travel, as well as their people, Seth decided to go and look for the formations using Thea's discerning eyes. Since they were sending their allies with lower levels into a battlefield, and not dungeons, the blacksmith wanted to make sure that at least home call was functioning, so they could escape in an emergency situation. Since they now had a stable transport method, there was no reason to avoid returning all the way back to Delta or Little Sigma, as it was called now. Although actual teleportation was not a cheap method, like the one that used the Pathworks as a medium, Evie guaranteed that it wouldn't be a problem. The hub was currently harnessing the power of 3 dragon veins that crossed close to the surface in this place and accumulated mana in the mountains behind the tower. In theory, this was even more power than Minas Mar collected with its 5 formations, but it was also very volatile, making it hard to harness large amounts at once. It was more than enough to use teleportation without worries and power several defense systems for now. If they really wanted to tap into the power of sleeping below their feet big time, they would need the help of someone at the skill level and knowledge of Alzalsar. Evie couldn't do it alone. In the meantime, Seth detached from the view of the star fort below and began cruising across the Holy Land on Puffles' back. "It's been a while since we just flew around like this," Puffles mentioned nostalgically. "You just became so strong. Revealing you would be revealing an ultimate trump card." Although Seth's words sounded like flattery, it was also the truth. Over the past months, especially after the evaluation, Puffles had made great jumps in strength, to the point Seth couldn't fathom it even when using Sight of Thea. It had become a habit for him to hide his trump cards. In a world where you didn't know what enemies were lurking in the shadows and who was watching you, it was better not to advertise their strength openly and give them a chance to prepare counters. The scene was a good example of that. Had Seth openly used his power without abandon, or revealed too many of their secrets, they would have probably prepared something to counter Man of Minas Mar's trump cards. "I'm Puffles, the Great. Obviously, I am a trump card and you should trust me more. I also have my own trump cards that may even trump your trump cards," the trump carding joker kept bragging. "Me too. Me too," Tatzel joined the conversation. "I have also grown a lot, Mom. Let me help more often, too." Seth had to admit that Tatzel was right. The once cute little snakelet had grown to become a really big, cute snakelet. Despite the extremely slow leveling speed of the emoji, Tatzel had already reached level 70. It was thanks to Sight of Thea that he could see his level again, though parts of his status were still obscured. With the rise in levels, the snakelet had also become bigger. With 7 meters in length, he could already raise himself to Seth's eye level. He had a thick and strong body, like that of some dragons, but he didn't have any legs. All right. If the situation allows it, I will throw you 2 out first to pull the fire. Is that okay?" Seth tried to appease them. "Now you get it. Let the great me clean the floor with them. You can finish them off afterward for the experience," the Eyevisor commented. Yap, Tatzel linguistically nodded at Puffles' words. Bickering around, they kept flying across the hills and mountains that bordered the massive scar in the earth and scouted the surrounding of the Mage Tower. Seth kept using Thaia's discerning eyes and the trait Thaia's vision to scan the landscape below like an eagle. The first thing that fell into his eyes was the enemy camps. Although Seth primarily came by to look for the magic formations, the enemy camp was quite prominent, not far from their construction site. Rows upon rows of tents and small huts with a myriad of creatures and beasts squirming among them. These had to be the forces that came from dungeons situated at the edge of the former hive territory. Looking down at them, Seth could help but think that they didn't look too different from humans. Of course, he didn't mean the outward appearance. Most of them were barely humanoid beasts or genuine magic beasts in general. What he meant was that they were all more or less intelligent. Clever enough to form an alliance and set up a structured camp, even come up with a strategy to attack a common enemy. Seth might have felt bad for seeing their lives as a bunch of experience if it wasn't for the fact that all of them were a bunch of invaders that came to Earth to pillage and plunder. Had they come in peace like the fairies, that had come to Earth to explore and make friends, it would have been a different story. What little compassion Seth had was extinguished at seeing how forming an alliance to attack them was their first step of action. As Evie had said, the average level of these creatures was not very high. With a sweep of Thaia's discerning eyes, he could tell that only a few of the beasts below had levels above 60, barely reaching 70. To go a little further, he was also able to confirm that none of them were incredibly strong for their level, except for some big monsters that had very high attributes thanks to their physique. Having checked out the enemy, he continued to look for the source of disruption. Is that one of them? Puffles, go down here. Seth muttered, seeing a sick yellow glow of magic under a ledge below. An illusion disguised the ledge as a mountain wall, covering the magic circle. The circle in question was made in a similar way to the one Seth had drawn to set up the temporary spatial beacon. It was a kind of sick, yellow dust strewn onto the ground and burnt into a glassy glaze by the magic running through it. In the center was a magic crystal, powering the spell. Taking a moment to look at it, Seth found it matched Evie's description. This kind of magic circle was popular since it was relatively easy to set up, in exchange it was easy to destroy. Seth just had to destroy the enamel to interrupt the flow of mana, rendering the circle useless and getting a free mana crystal. In this fashion, Seth found and destroyed another 3 magic circles like this, hidden by illusions across the hilly landscape surrounding their new base. The mana crystals were natural crystals of good quality, to be able to power a spatial disruption spell. Like arcane gold, they had the inherent trait to accumulate small amounts of mana from the surrounding and could grow, unlike the artificial ones. Seth was sure he could throw them into the golem forge to make some good mage golems later on. Once he was sure to have cleaned the surroundings where they expected the battle to take place, the blacksmith returned to their current base. Chapter 752 Palin. We really need a name for this tower, Seth said, after relaying his findings to the others. Since they were all gathered in the room, he thought it was a good moment to bring it up. Since you used Minas as tower in Minas Mar, I suggest we call this one also Minas something else to keep the naming scheme, Monique suggested lightheartedly. Everyone agreed with that sentiment and a heated debate ensued about what kind of tower this was. Evie and Allison advocated for Minas Curavar, as a sort of direct translation of Wizard Tower. Link, who had also come along this time, suggested Minas FOA, thinking of the treasure this tower would bring them if they started taking fees from people to come here. Finn threw her hat in the ring, wishing to call it Minas Drumstick, with the eternal hope that there would always be a warm meal to get here, especially chicken drumsticks. The glutton had been on a craze for fried chicken lately. The consensus finally settled on Minas Palin as in the tower abroad or far away from home. But no, Finn. No matter what happens, we won't call it Minas Drumstick. Seth was the only one traveling to Minas Drumsticks. With those memorial words, the discussion ended and the name of Minas Palin was decided on. Minas Mar. The preparations across Minas Mar's territory proceeded quickly. All eligible people that wished to increase their power and travel to the Holy Land were assembled at Little Sigma and Mount Agra. This mostly included people directly under Vladimir, as well as the new members of the Oath Guard and subsidiary guilds. Agra's defences had been reconstructed and strengthened, despite Nas Khorne still recovering from the invasion. Even though they were still mourning for the dead, or maybe because of it, the warriors of Agra also wished to join and grow their strength. The Agra branch of the System Church had recently been completed, which made it possible for people to travel to Minas Palin from there, too. Although the information of where exactly they would go and for what was not made public, the information of many soldiers traveling along the tree route and getting ready to leave could not be hidden. Mary and Jane, the original slaves 1 and 2, were currently at the forefront of the administrative battle, to organize everything. Like true professionals, they skillfully ignored any people that approached them to find out what was going on behind Mars' facades. Be it the Adventurer Guild, people of Delta, or other minor organizations speculating on possible gains behind the operation. They did so until someone appeared at the doorsteps of the embassy they could not ignore. A man with a big nose, like a beak, and massive crystal glasses that magnified his beady evil eyes to a normal size. Wearing a baroque attire that emphasized his wiry build, he climbed the steps. He was the current substitute for Lena in Delta. He was invited into the meeting room, where Mary had already prepared coffee, tea, and snacks. His smug smile when facing the woman fully showed his crooked nature. He was blatantly looking down on her. However, Mary didn't just endure this, she simply used reflective mind, a skill of her class as a chosen of Hestia. She simply reflected the contempt back onto him. His smug smile quickly vanished, as from his perspective, it was Mary looking down on his with contempt. "What brought you here today, Sir Maligar?" she asked with a business smile. "As the envoy of Krina in Delta, I visited today to ask you about Mars' suspicious movements pertaining to a large number of mid-level adventurers. As you mentioned, you are Krina's envoy in Delta. You have no business in Mars. If Krina wishes to know what we are doing, they should ask their envoy in Mars once she is here. Princess Lena should arrive soon, no. Tisk. While she is gone, I am still in charge of everything pertaining to Earth. If you are assembling troops for something like a military advance, with your strained relations to Delta, it is obviously part of my business," he insisted. "Even if we were to declare war on Delta, it wouldn't be any of your business. Krina's policy on non-interference includes local wars and skirmishes," Mary shot back. As part of founding their own district, she had thoroughly studied the legal document of Krina. "That is, unless we find evidence of you being backed or manipulated by a foreign power in your desire for war. In that case, we would have ample reason to interfere," he said triumphantly. He didn't have to voice the fact that forging this kind of evidence was easy, as he indicated it with his bearing. Yet, to Mary, this behavior just seemed pathetic and incapable. Who would have thought Krina also had these kinds of lowlives when they had such radiant examples like Lena? It really didn't reflect well on the prince he was serving. "Albeit we don't need it, it's a good thing the only foreign power in Mars is Krina. We even got the better envoy, so Krina has to really like us," she taunted him. Like this, they kept bickering back and forth, with Mary dancing a rhetoric dance around the man, as he kept getting more and more aggravated over the pointless discussion. She kept evading revealing anything at all, making it a very frustrating experience for the man. It kept going until finally, a figure came storming into the room. Her golden hair swayed as Lena entered the scene to save Mary, only to see Sir Maligar biting his handkerchief in irritation. In fact, it was he who quickly took this chance. He excused himself and fled from the embassy. "You almost made him cry." Lena mumbled, stumped, still trying to understand what had happened here. "That wasn't necessarily my intention, but I am glad you came before I had to see a grown man cry." In this manner, Lena finally returned to Delta. Her face looked tired. She had barely arrived in Delta and spent the past hour listening to Mary giving her a detailed rundown of the things that had happened in her absence. She was already practiced since she could recycle some of what they had talked about with Evie several days prior. Even though Lena didn't have to worry about the situation in Krina for now, since Hardwig had her back, she was thrust into an unexpectedly hairy situation upon her return. Seth had given her a rough explanation of things in Delta in his letters, but this was more complicated than she thought. She didn't only worry about the attack on Agra and the scene who was seemingly the puppeteer behind some of the big events in Delta. There was also a problem with Minas Palin. "You are telling me that you not only swiped the Adventurer Guild's materials but already built a working teleportation hub to monopolize their holy land," she recapped, massaging her temples. The scene was one thing. A local power, probably led by a powerful person with a special class, they were not much different from Minas Mar, from her perspective as a princess of a multidimensional empire. They were frogs in a well. Frogs with great potential, but still frogs. The Adventurer Guild on the other hand was a powerhouse across dimensions, indirectly backed by a god in the same power stratum as the system god himself. There were only two ways to deal with this dilemma. Come clean with them and find a peaceful solution between both parties, or try to hide everything about it and fake evidence that show that Minas Palin was not built with the materials from the guild. It was rather obvious which of those would work better. Has the guild already sent someone to inquire about the materials and the current movements? The first. The Adventurer Guild, like the System Church, were not religious zealots. They were people that could be spoken to. Lena was confident that they would be able to talk things out and find a solution that would appease both parties. Yes, but we made them wait for now. How is your relationship with the local guild master? I believe it is quite good, but you may need to talk with Seth about that. Where is he? Well, you are in luck. He returned from the Holy Land a few days ago and spent most of his time quietly in the workshop. He should come out around noon, so you have some time to take a break. You look tired. Thanks. Tower Master, Princess Lena has arrived. A messenger arrived at the workshop. What? She is back. He jumped up from the book he hunched over. Ah, I'm close to something. I will go meet her once I'm finished. The blacksmith had spent the past days trying to make a new armor set and kept perusing the books to find possible materials for the construction, purchasing, and testing their synergies. Seth had finally made a small breakthrough. Chapter 753 Lunatic Ithilden. Seth came up to the embassy to look for Lena. Seth, you finally show yourself. Ah, sorry, I heard you had arrived, but I wanted to finish something I wanted to show you. Show me, she asked surprised and quickly caught something he tossed to her. Looking at the thin in her hands was a fine, almost filigree gauntlet. It was made of a brilliant silver metal and studded with milky gems, that had a blue hue like the sea. Or the moonstones, she asked surprised. She had seen quite a few of Seth's works, but they never struck her as lavish. This gauntlet on the other hand looked more like a piece of jewelry than a piece of armor. A little clueless she appraised the item he had thrown to her. Hand of Lunacy, L. Lunacy set 1/X. Epic. Physical damage, 100. Mag damage, 600. Physical DEF 1000. Mag DEF 1500. Durability 2500. 1 plus 29% to all stats in the moonlight. 2 plus 60% power of spells. 3 encroachment of lunacy. 4 plus 12% to all stats in any light. Lunacy set effects, to be updated. Part of a yet-to-be-finished set. It is a glove made of Ithilden, created by Master Smith, the first Master Enchanter, Master Blacksmith and Master Goldsmith of Earth. Lena was stumped looking at the item. The effects were already very powerful for a single glove, yet it was still lacking any sort of enchantment. The princess could tell that all effects were the results of Seth's skills and the materials used. What really stood out was the encroachment of lunacy. It was an effect that indirectly scaled with willpower. It used the vague term of conviction instead. Encroachment of lunacy. 1 improves the power of the wearer based on their conviction in their actions. 2 strengthens conviction in their action based on willpower. Lena quickly understood how terrifying this effect could be. It was madness, as at no point it made any judgment about the wearer's convictions. As long as they were convinced, they would gain strength, and become even more convinced. It was an effect that could outright turn someone into a lunatic, a zealot even. All this, and this was just one item. What kind of things would a lunacy set be able to do? Seth showing this to her held several meanings to the princess. What calmed her the most, was that it was a huge sign of trust. It felt like he finally accepted her, maybe because their positions changed? Would she finally be able to find out more about this mysterious place called Minas Mar? He also showed off his skills to her and that he was still growing, despite reaching the master ranks. Lena could tell that the Tower Master had started delving deeper into the theory behind the synergistic relationships of materials based on the fact that he placed moonstones on the gauntlet, which was most likely the reason behind the fourth effect. Maybe even his ambitions to walk even further on the path of a blacksmith. What do you think? It's the first piece of a new set I'm working on. When it's finished it will be an armor specialized for mages, he stated proudly. But what is this encroachment of lunacy? It's not an enchantment. The blacksmith seemed to deliberate for a moment before he continued. Since I hope for your full cooperation in the future, I will not hold any secrets from you, he said with a grin as if what he was going to tell her was something amusing. So what is it? It's the special trait of Earth's Ithilden, he revealed. Can you imagine it? Our moon's special aspect is literally madness. Ithilden refined with the power of Earth's moon can turn you into a lunatic, he said with an ironic laugh. Lena didn't voice it, but after seeing everything that happened in this world, it seemed kind of fitting that this world's moon drove people crazy. Maybe not just people but the world as a whole. Of course, this was just her having a mean thought and not an actual reason for anything. Yes, really ironic. You managed to find the method to create Ithildan on Earth. More surprising than the Moon of Madness, was the revelation that Seth already found out a method to refine Mithril and create native Ithildan. It was hard to imagine somebody could succeed so quickly in a world that did not know magic before. Well, Al did, with some help from the Theocracy of Chain, he said, and explained how he looted a few chunks of failed Ithildan from their stronghold, which the sorceress used to find a functioning method. If it was the Theocracy, that makes sense, she mumbled. They are quite the metallurgy freaks. Anyway, I guess Mary already brought you up to date. Yes. Quite the chaos, and it is partially my fault. The scene completely evaded my attention, she lamented. She had to admit that she had been too occupied by the overall situation to even fathom that there was someone behind it. No need to blame yourself. We also only heard about it recently. Do you have any plans already? I don't know what you take me for, but I'm not a god. I need more time to get into the thick of it all, okay? I was just asking. You can take your time since we will take ours to break past Leave 90 in the Holy Land. Wait, you are already Leave 90. Didn't you know? Most of us are. Did you already talk with someone about your plans once your level rises? Beamont offered some nebulous stuff, but I declined. I'm pretty sure something happens at Leave 100, right? However, from Beamont's stuttering, it sounded like it would be better not to know beforehand, he explained, and also had to explain Beamont's identity. I see. If you have a question after Leave 95 you can ask me. Regarding the Holy Land, I think you should invite the Adventurer Guild for negotiations. It would be best to find a peaceful solution early on. You do already have plans after all, he smiled happily. Let's ask the guild for a meeting tomorrow. You should use the night to some good rest. You look terrible. Thanks, she answered sarcastically. Good night. Tomorrow will be a big day. With that, he left her standing alone in the corridor. Yeah, good night. She mumbled. What did he mean by a big day? The answer came the next morning, in the shape of a breakfast with the lords of Minas Mar and a piece of parchment placed beside her plate. She looked up shocked, after skimming through the document. This is... Yeah, it's a simple soul contract. Please don't take it as a sign of distrust. Many of us have great trust in you, this is just to cover all our bases. Who knows what would happen if you get captured, or Krana puts pressure on you. In that case, it will also be a good excuse and save you from committing treason against your dad. Lena fell silent when Seth explained it. She had really seen it as a sign of distrust towards her, but in the end, it was really just a contract that blocked her from relaying sensitive information about Mina's march. One with her soul at stake even, which made it very hard to break the oath with outside means. Taking her silence as a no, Seth took a breath and tried to explain again, but Lena cut him off by simply signing it after a short sigh. Seeing that, all the expressions on the table relaxed and turned to bright smiles. Now then, can you tell me how in the world you are able to use soul contracts? And what do you even intend to do with my soul if the worst comes to the worst? What is there even that you have to hide from, that necessitates these actions? And... Before she kept going, a small golden something flew at her face. The princess caught it by reflex and found that it was a small golden ring with the crest of Minas Mar on it. The Adventurer Guild will come by at noon. Finn will give you a tour. If you still have questions afterward, you can find me at my workshop. Chapter 754 Cozy Home. You have been hiding this treasure all this time. Lena, followed by Finn, barged into the workshop. Seth jumped a little, as he had been focused on the second gauntlet, currently setting the moonstones. Are you already done with the tour? Seth asked, a little puzzled. The princess seemed a little more excited and irritated than he expected. He was pretty sure that Lena had at least some inkling about their magic tower. After all, they were still selling them mana crystals. This deal was one of the few things nobody dared to touch. They had even allowed a technician inside to install the mana converters. Although they had never revealed much and made sure that man didn't see much, someone as capable as her would have known. On that note, the technician had also gotten the soul contract treatment, once Seth had gotten the skill. It acted on top of the original magic contract that already forced him to keep anything he might see the secret. Voicing his doubts, Lena looked at him, stumped for a moment. Of course, I knew there was something. But this, she kept waving her arms around like a lunatic. Even Krishna would have to invest huge sums of money to build something like this, and it was right under our feet the whole time. It is our very safe and cozy home. I'm sure you now understand the reason for the soul contract. Any more questions? He asked her after she nodded awkwardly. It seemed calling a highly advanced mage tower, that could act as a fortress in warfare on a continental scale, a cozy home was not quite how she would describe it. I have a lot. Seeing her jaw lower with every answer to her question was kind of funny. Sitting in his workshop in the bowels of Minas Mar, Seth was absolutely honest to her, just like with his other friends. They talked about many things and a few answers were so shocking she even seemed to regret the question. Especially when they started about Seth's interactions with gods, soul armaments in general, the Faer, the golems, and finally his assortment of legendary items he made himself. If it was not firmly attached, Lena's jaw may have fallen on the floor. How many legendaries have you made already? Dunno, I didn't really count them. Maybe 30, he gave a random estimation. He couldn't help but enjoy seeing her reaction to something that had already become something normal to him. Finn had a hard time holding back her chuckles. 30, she choked. And those people you revived? The Faer? There are about 200 of them in Minas March, 230 if you count the first generation, too. You probably saw them while Finn brought you around. They are staying in the tower during normal times. There are about as many running around the world since they had their own dreams and goals. Is that what you would do, if you got your hands on my soul? She asked after a long pause. It was Seth's turn to look surprised. How had she arrived at that kind of thought? The blacksmith had not actually thought about that. It was true, if she were to break the contract, he would get her soul as collateral. However, he used the contract as a safety measure, not to collect materials. What was even more interesting was that Lena showed more curiosity toward this subject, than fear or disgust. I have not given that any thought before. Why? Would you want me to do that with you? An eternal life as my creation, with absolute freedom once I draw my last breath, he provoked her, quickly getting her dumbfounded expression in return. I didn't mean it like that. I am not interested in a fate like that, just, you know, I wouldn't mind a second chance if I die some unfair death or something. It's not like the future I chose here is very safe. You mean to say, I have your consent in advance? Seth asked amused. Call it whatever you like, she said with a pout and turned away. It seemed like Seth had teased her a little too much. Come on, I was just joking. Do you have any other questions? And no, let me process this stuff first. Well, you would better hurry with that, we are going to meet the Adventurer Guild Master soon. Until later then. Lena said and tried to leave, but stopped dead in her track when Finn suddenly turned into a human. Don't work too long today, she whispered before she pressed her lips to his for a sensual kiss. When her lips finally detached from his, they both saw Lena, who had frozen solid at the sight that had become rather common in recent times. Suddenly, Finn started chuckling out of nowhere. I guess, I and Lena also have some stuff to talk about before your appointment, she excused herself with an excited smile and dragged the broken Lena out of the workshop. Seth could only watch them leave with a puzzled look. The blacksmith on the other hand returned to his gauntlet. After searching through the books and testing Earth as Ithildan, he had come up with a blueprint for his first original armor set that was purely based on a material synergy of the individual parts. To further refine it, he was now forging the prototype. Similar to the elemental resistance armor, he would then start testing what enchantment would change when added to the armor set. Although the blueprint skill had a function to simulate the effects, Seth could only see the full extent of his skill and the synergies once he really made it. Soon after he finished the gauntlet, a messenger came by to tell him that the guild master had arrived. Tower Master, we meet again, the man that looked like a villain with his slicked back hair and a scarred eye greeted him with a friendly smile. Guildmaster Bryce, it has been a while, Seth greeted back and shook his hand. Looking into the room, he saw Lena and Mary already present. When he met the princess' eyes, she quickly avoided his gaze and slightly blushed. What had happened? Did Finn, that little troublemaker, tell her something unruly or embarrassing? He would have to make sure to squeeze Finn out later. The Vice Guild Master had also come along, though his existence had stepped into the background. We had tried to contact you earlier, but to no effect. Why the sudden request for a meeting? Bryce directly stabbed the crux of the matter with a hot knife, the moment they were all seated. We had been waiting for our advisor from Krina, Princess Lena, to arrive. Seth unapologetically used her name and absence as an excuse. Of course, I know the princess. If this meeting is because of her advice, then it seems like our suspicions are correct. Bryce asked calmly. Seth saw no reason to beat around the bush with the guild master. If your suspicions are that we managed to salvage your materials and set up a teleportation hub with it, then yes. That is correct. The blush on Lena's face immediately vanished when she saw Seth simply blurting it out like it was nothing. Even Bryce widened his eyes and needed a moment to process. What, isn't it what you suspected, seeing us assemble our people? Or did you think something stupid like Minasmar preparing for war? Bryce cleared his throat at Seth's remark. I would lie if we didn't suspect you to have taken possession of the materials, but it was not to the point where we would have dared to openly accuse you. If I heard correctly, you already succeeded in setting up a functioning teleport formation. Yet, it was very costly to get the blueprints and secure the construction. I hope for the Adventurer Guild to reimburse us for our efforts. Our reimburse? Of course, if you want to cooperate with us in the future and use it until you manage to set up the planned dungeon city, you should also pitch in with some financial support. I think that is only fair. Why you stole our materials and still want us to pay you? The Vice Guild Master finally couldn't take it anymore and exploded. But before Seth or anyone else could say anything, Bryce had already slapped his subordinate across the face. You are speaking out of turn, Vice Guild Master, Bryce said with a murderous tone in his voice. Chapter 755 in Minaspalan. As the Tower Master just said, they salvaged materials we lost in this tragedy. We have lost a lot of good people in the Holy Land, and I know you are upset, but this was not Minasmar's fault. He turned back to Seth. I'm glad that Minasmar approached us first to offer cooperation in the future. Already having a functioning teleport hub will save us a lot of trouble in the future. Of course, we are ready to offer financial support for the right to use it in the future. Others may have seen Seth's approach as crass or unreasonable, but the bard had simply followed the directions of his skills. It wasn't just the effects of voice of Seth, his personality attribute, or Persephone's crown brainwashing the Adventurer Guild Master. He spoke the way he did because it was the speech he came up with based on the inspiration of Fenix and memorable speech. The words he chose were words that worked because the person he spoke to was Bryce. A man that was competent enough to get to the peak and had learned how to deal with the schemes and falseness that predominated among such high ranks. But in his core, he was a rough man, who rather spoke naked truths and preferred something getting straight to business. It was the impression Seth had gotten from meeting with him. Seth didn't want to take advantage of the Adventurer Guild and looked for a solution that was profitable for both sides. It was the message that Bryce received, with some help from voice of Seth, that conveyed his intentions even more clearly. Having come to an agreement to cooperate, it was on Mary and Lena to discuss the details. Professional contracts and diplomatic solutions were not the job of the blacksmith. He simply watched and listened as a spectator, only throwing in some words here and there when he thought he had to. At the end of the initial talk, they had worked out a rough alliance between the Adventurer Guild and Minasmar, to cooperate in the construction of the dungeon city, which the guild dreamed of. The main task for Minasmar was simply providing free access to Minaspalan for members of the guild. In exchange, Minasmar would have free reign over the dungeons in the Holy Land until the city was set up. From that point, they agreed to share rights to territory and dungeons between the guild and the district. This way Minasmar as a district of Earth became CO manager of the guild's Holy Land. 2 days later, Minaspalan. Do you think Beth and the others will manage? Paolo asked a little worried. Their draft order came just a day after they met the envoys from Beta. It was the healer's idea to offer them to travel along with the Oath Guard to Little Sigma. There was no safer option possible and their superior agreed taking along some diplomatic envoys and giving them a good impression was no problem. Marco and Paolo had gotten a little closer with them on their journey, but they had to split up at Tree Station 1 when the Oath Guards used the teleportation at the System Church to come to Minaspalan, as this place was called. They could only hope that Beth and the others would get a chance to talk with Vladimir. They will be okay. We have bigger worries now, don't you think? Marco asked beside him. Only now, that they stepped out of the fortifications, did the two fathom the magnitude of what they had joined. There were hundreds, maybe thousands of tents that filled the plain before them. They had come with most of the Oath Guards from TS5, but this was several times the number of people. It felt like a city of tents. Don't worry, I won't allow you to die, Paolo joked, overplaying his own nervousness. If one of us is in danger, it's you as the healer. I won't fall to a bunch of leave 60 mobs, he said confidently. Stop bickering and go to your tents, you two. You guys were the last batch, the briefing will begin in 2 hours, a superior scolded them and they promptly left to look for their tent. They had been given a rough explanation that they were going to take part in a battle at a place the Adventurer Guild called their Holy Land. However, they were not told much more, they would probably be informed about their roles during the mentioned briefing. Here, it's this one, Marco called Paolo, after finding their tent. Each of them had been given a note with a number, that designated the tent and their bed inside the tent before they had set off from Little Sigma. Inside the tent were rows of simple bunk beds where people were already resting. Everyone here wore the same Oath Guard armors, though there were some differences between the ones mages wore and those of vanguards or tanks. You two are the last ones. I'm Gus, I'm in charge of everyone in this tent, a bulky man introduced himself to them and showed off a silver sigil ring on his pinky finger. It was the sign that he was a team leader, a rank above them who wore bronze rings. There would have also been a silver badge on his armor, but Gus was not wearing his armor. I'm Marco, this is Paolo. I'm a swordsman, he is a healer. Good, good. We still have 2 hours before we have to assemble. Find your beds and make your preparation, if you have to. I will call you when it is time. With that Gus was already gone, talking to someone else. The reason there were tents, was not only to have a place for people to sleep. Although the inventory was extremely useful, it was not unlimited. One of the things they had to take care of to prepare, was sorting out the inventory. Many would leave less important things like spare clothes or miscellaneous things in the tents, in favor of various potions provided to them by the guild. Paolo was given all kinds of potions, not just health, mana, and stamina, but many that would help against abnormal statuses like fear, freezing, burn, or poison. Especially as a healer, he was given spare rations so he could use them on his comrades if needed. It's time for the briefing, everyone. I hope you are ready. Exactly 2 hours later Gus appeared back in the tent and called everyone for the meeting. Marco and Paolo had used the time to prepare, eat something, and got to know their temporary comrades in the team. Hearing their leader call, they all got to their feet and followed Gus outside. He led them to a small square close to their tent. They had seen a few of these as they looked for their tents. In the middle of the square was a small podium, with someone wearing the armor of the Oath Guard standing on it. They stood there for a few moments, as more people kept flooding onto the plaza. The man on the podium looked around for a moment before he started speaking. His voice was magically strengthened. I think everyone is here, so let's begin. Hello everyone, my name is Ortega and I'm in charge of explaining why you are here and what you will be doing here in the next few days. What followed was Ortega's explanation of the current situation. It was actually hard for Paolo to understand all the details, but the important thing was that there was an army of monsters threatening to attack at any moment now and they had been assembled to gain a few levels by fighting it off. Don't worry, there should be no danger to your life. None of you has a low level and all of you have the items of Mina's March. That doesn't mean you can get careless, there are also some greater beasts that may pose a problem if you face them 1v1. Don't hesitate to use home call and return to Little Sigma, if you fear for your life. We don't need any heroes sacrificing themselves. You are only fighting this battle, because the enemy are at a suitable level for you, not because there is anything in danger, got it? Lord Evie could handle the whole army on her own but decided to leave it to you guys. Be grateful for the easy experience, Ortega warned them not to do anything stupid. Although Paolo found the way he said it really weird, no it was overall really weird, Paolo was still somewhat relieved. They were not fighting some desperate battle or anything. As a healer, this meant he probably wasn't going to have a whole lot of work. Ortega also explained the terrain, their position and a little about the enemies they may face. Hearing all this, Paolo actually felt confident to enter this battle. Chapter 756 Not Soldiers. Out of the way. Run. Get out of the way. They had just taken their positions when the ground under their feet started quaking and breaking apart. A rumbling roar shook them to the core. Surfacing from right beneath their feet was a giant lion-shaped creature. With many of meaty tassels and a body covered in armor plates, it roared to the sky, standing amid the army of Oath Guards. Get back in your parties. It's just big, nothing more. Gus, their group leader screamed, as did the other leaders. The Oath Guard was not structured like a real army. They were all individual adventurers, not soldiers that had a lot of time for any kind of drill. What they were used to instead was party play, so the whole army was divided into system parties, led as a raid team. This way they could quickly react to sudden changes in the battlefield, such as sudden, armored lions appearing among them. A circle was formed quickly. While tanks and vanguards kept the massive beast in check, the rear guard covered it in magic. Aside from the Oath Guard clad in their uniform armor, there were the members of subsidiary guilds, people from Little Sigma, and the warriors of Nas Khorne. The latter fought as cavalry on their massive woolly rhinos. Although all of the Oath Guard looked like knights, only a few of them had classes like knights, which partially depended on a mount. Those people could be seen as silver specks among the people from Agra, as they joined the cavalry. Paolo and Marco stood right in the front, among the first that would face the infantry, also the best place to gain experience. But it also meant they had no time for a break. The first wave had been quick beasts in the shapes of wolves, deers, and bears. It was manageable. Now, they were constantly cornered by weird humanoids and classic fantasy tropes that looked like goblins, hobgoblins, and similar stuff. We are pulling back. Let the reserves get to the front and get back to camp to rest. Gus suddenly granted them salvation. They had been fighting all day and gladly returned to their tents. After a day on an actual battlefield, Paolo had lost the confidence he had gotten during the briefing. He also had to work a lot more than he expected. It wasn't that the enemy was strong, but that they had huge numbers. Although they had no hard time killing them one by one, fatigue kept accumulating. But it was not without gain. The experience accumulated as much as the fatigue. A day on the battlefield was stressful, but gained Paolo 5 levels, bringing him to the cusp of level 58. At the end of the day it felt like it was worth it. While the battle on the surface was going on, Seth and the others had set off on their own, leaving their army in the hand of Evie, Vigu, Beemant, and the golems. Evie and the golems were enough to dissolve the enemy army if needed, while Vigu, the Oni, and Beemant were experienced leaders. Seth and the field teams on the other hand went to farm some of the dungeons these guys came from. Their immediate targets were the dungeons that were originally theirs, the ones bordering the former Hive territory. The others went to gain experience, but the blacksmith had a secondary objective. Quite some while ago, Ortega had told him about what was the Naga dungeon like. Seth had been reminded of this when he was browsing the pages of his new books. What grabbed his attention was the introduction to Naga and their materials. They were actually one of the few races of creatures that could not only grow in power but could also change their shape depending on their talents. This was why they were known as horned snakes with almost dragon-like properties, half-snake humans, or even as humans. The Nook had listed the materials of their snake forms, and what all materials had in common was that they were some of the few materials that could improve luck. Naga were known to have a connection to fortune and good luck. So he had a wild thought. If their bodies had a connection to luck, then maybe their souls did so, too. The blacksmith had to look for a soul for his lucky trinket for quite some time, and now he saw his chance to finally get his hands on one. It was safe to say, Seth was ready to grab a bunch of souls on this trip. He expected the Naga to have spread out, despite Ortega's culling. The bard was ready to clean a wide fortified area, but when he arrived everything was empty. No, not empty. Already been laid to waste. Fortifications were blown apart, buildings were burnt down, and the ground was littered with rotting Naga corpses. FFFF. Seth's speed increased as he rushed towards the place where the dungeon entrance was supposed to be. Ortega described it as a massive kind of lavish temple, but what Seth found were a bunch of ruins in a hole in the ground. When he entered the hole, the ruins left above ground were only a smoldering pool of molten rock. "Isn't it getting a little warm?" one lizard-looking piece of shit said to the other. "Maybe the boss increased the temperature of the lava pools again? If it gets too hot, take some distance. Even if we are descendants of dragons, the boss is going a little overboard with the designs," the other waste mumbled into the darkness past the dull red shine of the magma pool behind him. "Ugh." Only a short gasp answered him. "Stuart. Are you?" He suddenly felt a strong hand clench his throat. The rest of his sentence was erased from this world, together with the dragon newt as a blaze of dark red fire swallowed him whole. Seth was royally pissed. When he had finally found a good chance to get a soul for maybe his most important ring, the bunch of idiotic dragon newts had, in a fit of sudden megalomania, decided to extend their territory. Probably as a reaction to the vacuum left by the hive's escape. But the reasons didn't matter to Seth. Not even a little bit. Calm reaction at Leave Max didn't react to this level of emotion anymore because he was still thinking straight, despite his aggravation. Even when the only real change this made was that he used the Draconic Titan Flame to turn everyone to ashes. This way he could vent, and still get experience and soul drops. The dragon newts were all in the late leave 80s and not weak for their levels, but Seth didn't bother acting prudent or tactical. The blacksmith rushed through the tunnel system using the skills of his armor and eradicated the enemy in the most simple and brutal manner possible. Like a passing wind that withered people to ashes in the blink of an eye, his rush looked more like a chain of spontaneous self-combustion than an attack. The tunnel system kept expanding the further he went. It was a vast network of volcanic caves, inhabited by dragon newts with the lineage of fire dragons. The blacksmith abused Thea's vision to completely and thoroughly depopulate the dungeon. When he left a floor, only ashes were left behind. With all the skills he had, those he trained, and those lent by items, Seth still felt most comfortable using his pyrokinesis together with his trait as a kin of fire. Especially in this kind of environment, which was rich in fire elements. He could constantly recover his mental power, mana, health, and stamina using fire absorption EX. Seth stayed in peak shape, despite rushing through the canyon, using his powers to their full extent. Not even the bosses at every 10th floor could as much as slow him down. He kept up a constant speed until he finally came to a stop at the gates of the boss room on the 60th floor. Chapter 757 Ashwalker. The only reason he came to a halt was that he was thirsty and wanted to check his status. He had eradicated hundreds of dragon newts and not a few of them were leave 90 or above. Especially on the recent floors. In the corner of his mind, he thought that they would probably make good golems, but currently, Seth just wanted to get rid of his frustration and immerse himself in the sea of flames. It felt like an eternity, that he just let loose and used his favorite power. There were more dragon newt dungeons in the Holy Land. Looking at his status, he frowned. Despite his body count, his experience bar was only filled to about half. It was true, the amount needed past leave 90 grew exponentially. And this 50% was not solely what he gained in this dungeon. After killing hundreds of mobs on the same level, he had gained maybe 10 to 20% of the experience needed for the next level. This was a crazy experience requirement, compared to earlier levels where this deed would suffice to rise 1 or 2 levels. Having satisfied his curiosity, he took a sip of water and chowed down on an energy bar before entering the boss room. Sitting on a massive throne, sat a just as massive dragon newt. His snout was stouter, making him look closer to a dragon than a lizardman, like the other dragon newts. Really the only difference Seth saw between them were the wings, scales, and strength. The male boss on the throne had his wings folded away and wore an archaic chain shirt on top of his scales. It was combined with an intricate skirt and sash. Dragon Newt Elder Khazar leave 98. However, what made this creature really stand out was the fact that his status was also partially obscured, even to Thia's discerning eyes. He was a being on the same level as Tatzel. He could see his level and most of the status, but some parts were censored. "You must be the one who has been crushing our younglings," Khazar spoke in a deep rumbling voice. The anger he felt was clearly audible in his tone. "I can actually feel a comforting aura from you, so why are you being so cruel to us?" he asked with clenched fists. A comforting aura? Was it because his armor granted a neutral relationship with dragons? Seth deliberated for a moment, whether he should just kill Khazar or humor his question for a moment. The blacksmith had spotted the dungeon core behind the throne, which meant this was surprisingly the last floor and the last boss. Khazar was the only one left here. "You know what? I will tell you, so you can think about it once you respawn back in your home. I'm quite pissed because you killed the Naga before I had the chance to do so. You see, I really wanted to see if their soul had the same fortune effect as their materials. Now, I will never know because you asshats suddenly started conquering stuff." "Souls? Are you a demon, like that Maestro?" Khazar asked, but he suddenly felt a hand grasping his face. When did he move? Enough talky talk. Time to die. It was the first time for Khazar that flames cause him pain. It was also the last time in this iteration since his body could not resist the blaze. The pain was burned in his consciousness, as his head and body turned to ashes. He finally understood what his own victims felt like when he burned them to death. Ding! Title: Ashwalker gained. You have cremated a whole dungeon's population. All fire-related skills are 5% stronger in dungeons. Ding! Your title Dragon Slayer, minuscule, had evolved to Dragon Slayer, minor. The damage you deal to dragon species has slightly increased. Your notoriety with the dragon race has slightly increased. Where is the dungeon master? Come out or I destroy the core, he threatened after listening to the notification. After the boss was defeated, Seth stepped up to the dungeon core. More often than not, the dungeon master was a different individual from the dungeon boss. When there was no answer whatsoever, except maybe the trembling of the core, Seth came to the conclusion that Khazar had fulfilled both roles. The blacksmith seriously thought about breaking the core for real, instead of just threatening it. But decided against it in the end. He had flattened the dragon newts and calmed down for the most part. Destroying a dungeon was only a loss to them in the future. Give me all the stuff you have and never accept a dragon newt as a dungeon master, boss, or mob again. If I hear that you did, I will break you without remorse, he threatened the core, as he had learned it from Finn. Is this all? Seth asked, a little surprised. This was no small dungeon, and there were no raiders before him, but the core only spat out a small chest with roughly 50 gold. The core trembled vehemently and suddenly spat out a pure white horn. Naga horn, crafting material. Epic. The horn of a high-ranking Naga. Holds properties of magic, transformation, fire, and fortune. Fine, you live to grow another dungeon. Seth bagged the horn and left the dungeon through the teleport formation that had appeared after he killed the boss. Outside he checked his inventory. He had burned all the mobs to ashes, so he was not left with a lot. Apart from the dungeon chest, he got a lump of molten metal from the boss and 125 epic-rated dragon newt souls of medium size. He guessed that he had killed roughly 700 of the lizards. This meant the drop rate was really a little increased from 5 to 10% to 15 to 20% thanks to Graphias. This was not a bad haul, taking into account that the dragon newt souls gave a buff to physical damage, fire resistance, and an overall improvement of 10% defense. The latter showed their heritage as dragon keen, as it was most likely the degraded effect of a dragon's damage nullification. These were the souls that naturally dropped, so Seth became quite curious about what a soul he harvested would look like. It was a good thing that there was a whole faction of dragon newts in the Holy Land. There was more than one dungeon he could plunder to experiment. The only thing slightly worrisome was the Dragon Slayer title. He didn't know whether it would grow even further if he kept killing dragon newts, or if this was it. After all, it could be that the title would grow dependent on the quality of the dragon keen he killed, not the number. For now, his scorpion armor fixed his relationship with dragons to a neutral status. But what if he didn't wear the full set? Would dragons start coming to look for a fight with him? If it ever came to that, he hoped Al would return before that happened. A dragon-slaying sorceress was definitely a good deterrence for dragons, right? By the time Seth returned on Puffle's back, the battle was already over. The enemy camp had been stormed and completely razed to the ground. He was the first of the higher UPS to return. Seth, you are already back. Link greeted him when he entered the canteen of Minas Palin, his first destination upon return. Since Link had neglected his levels once he found his true passion in cooking, he had also taken part in the battle, to defeat the outliers of higher levels and take apart monsters with promising cooking ingredients. Apart from him, there were 3 other chefs he had chosen from the applicants. Those 3 were currently cooking food for the canteen, while Link was simply supervising them, still wearing the armor, stained from battle and dismantling monsters. Wanna eat together? Link invited him friendly. Sure, it will probably take a while for the others to return. Seth happily agreed and they began stuffing themselves, not having to fear that Finn would vacuum away their food when they weren't looking. Chapter 758 All Just Weaklings. How did your dungeon raid go? I don't want to talk about it. I doubt the Naga were a big problem. Did something go wrong? I said, I don't want to talk about it, Link. Seth shot the gourmet hunter down and they kept eating in silence. After a moment he sighed. Fine. A bunch of stupid dragon newts crushed the original dungeons, meaning I didn't get my hands on the Naga. The dragon newts have already gotten this far? Link asked, surprised. It's not like they were far away, to begin with. It's just surprising they have started expanding their influence. You guys already started without us, a high-pitched voice cried out and a projectile crashed into their bowl of mashed potatoes. Finn? We talked about diving in our food. Seth scolded, incensed. Arr! I hereby claim this bowl for myself. It is mine and mine alone, the conqueror of the dinner table declared her supremacy over the liquefied taters in a fit of laughter. Sorry, Seth, but I would also like to join. Mina was not far behind the Vittle pirate. Aside from his 2 partners, the rest of the lords and field teams soon followed and the canteen became even rowdier. It went on until late in the night before everyone returned to their rooms. The next day they talked about their experiences in the dungeons. Like Seth, everyone who owned a legendary item, or became a chosen one, had entered the dungeon solo. And like Seth, they all barely made any considerable amount of experience. After each of them crashed a whole dungeon, none of them gained more than 10% on their way to leave 91. It was a little frustrating. As a matter of fact, their talks soon turned to a different place. If these superficial dungeons did not do it, then what about the Abyss? Mike threw into the room, turning the conversation to the darker part of the Holy Land, the less known part. The Abyss was the name the Adventurer Guild had given the depths of the canyon and caves below it. All the dungeons, even the big ones like Cause Dam, the Orc Kingdom, and the terrifying ones like the Maestro, were all just weaklings that were pushed to the surface by whatever was down there. It was a dark place almost no adventurer returned from. Those that returned could only speak of the unending and difficult system of caves and dungeons, one weirder and more dangerous than the other. Let's go there! Finn cheered wildly in the face of danger. Unlike the surface, that place could be actually dangerous, Tekker threw in. What he said was based on the power levels of the members of the field teams, not ordinary people, or the Oath Guards. If the surface were the losers of the Abyss, then the Abyss definitely had the potential to be difficult even for them. The forces at the surface consisted of troops in the range of Leave 80 and bosses above Leave 90. The forces in the Abyss would have even higher standards. There might even existences beyond the comprehension of their appraisal skills, like Puffles or Wolfram. Then the teams should stay together when we start exploring a way down there, Seth commented. Each member here, except maybe Tekker, could take on the weaker surface dungeons on their own, but they were originally parties. If the Abyss was that dangerous, they simply had to go with the basics and tackle the dungeons there as parties. They would share the experience, but lower possible dangers. If the beasts in the Abyss were really mostly above Leave 90, the experience could still make it worthwhile. With that in mind, they contacted the Adventurer Guild. Since they had already come to an agreement with them, it was no big deal to get the information about the entrances to the Abyss. There were a few strewn across the area of the Holy Land, most prominently were those that the current factions had crawled out from. The Maestro, the Dragon Newts, Cause Dam, and the Hive had come to the surface using entrances at the center of their territories. Since Mian's Palin was built at the edge of the former territory of the Hive, this meant they just had to find the entrance at their doorstep. I will send the scout golems. Maybe we can find the entrance if we let them scout the tunnels of the Hive. Seth suggested. A swarm of flying little eyeball golems was sure to find some deep dark hole at the deepest part of the tunnels. So, what do we do until we find that entrance? It could take days until those things find what we are looking for, Lixus commented. We could train our party play. How about we give the Maestro a visit? We still owe him, no? Mina suggested. We really do, don't we? Maybe Elsa and Co would want to come along, too. Monique asked with some bloodlust. They had not forgotten the ambush of the experimental subjects. Seth helplessly looked on as everyone started coming up with ideas to attack the Maestro. If he had the choice, he would go for the Dragon Newts. Not just because of his personal grudge, but because the demon was definitely the harder opponent. It was one thing to defeat an army of lab rats, it was another to wander into the mad scientist's lab. Who knew what kind of sick traps that demon laid out for intruders? A demon specialized in alchemy, poisons, enchantments, and body restructuring could do a bunch of sick things to people that wandered into his domain. Despite his worries, Seth quickly saw that voting against it would have no meaning. Everyone was already convinced to attack the demon. Seth could only trust the items and their skills. He had to acknowledge that all of them had grown a lot since they returned from the Holy Land. It wasn't about the level, but about the mastery of their skills and the powers of the items he gave them. It was best shown by the fact that all of them had been able to solo their respective dungeons, although they were dungeons in the Leave 80 range. The only exception was Tekker, who simply couldn't deal damage. With his kind of damage output, a boss had a higher chance to die from old age, than through the tank's attacks. Maybe it was possible to conquer the Maestro if they stayed in teams. I guess it's decided then. Let's invade the Maestro's territory until we find the entrance to the Abyss, Seth ended the discussion. Unlike the entrance to the Abyss, they at least knew where the territory of the demon was supposed to be. Chapter 759 Poison? Resisted. You have been poisoned. You have resisted. You have been poisoned. You have resisted. Did everyone drink their yoghurt? This place has some serious stench. Seth joked about a health drink but meant the higher antidote potion Allison had developed. It was a potion that was able to give full poison resistance for 3 hours after intake. It was a strong potion even within the journeyman tier. Seth had joined Yulekat's Fur, or Field Team 2, meaning he was traveling with his old party that coincidentally had his 2 partners in it. Entering the territory the demon Maestro had claimed brought a distinct change in the landscape. The sick orange light of the Holy Land was dampened by clouds of poison fog. The grey light coming through fell on dark rocks, covered in black sludge. It was like the whole place was covered in the residues of rot and waste. The creatures they faced in this place were not all subjects. Many were hideous mutated versions of normal beasts. Corroded Warg Leave 87. It was a whole pack of malformed canine beasts. Wargs were usually a massive variation of wolves, and these ones were even bigger with 2 meters shoulder height. Their size however wasn't the disturbing part. All of them were covered in bald spots as if they had mange. The bare skin was covered in scabs and oozing toxic pus. They really fit the place. For safety reasons, Seth stunned them using Dragon Might while the others blew them away with ranged skills. It was definitely not because they were too disgusted by the sight and nobody wanted to get close enough for melee combat. Who knew what kind of disease they could get if some of the pus hit them? What became clear as they faced hordes of beasts like corrupted rats, corroded wargs, and scaleless lizards was that the Maestro was some kind of faction that conquered a territory. This place was simply a polluted wasteland where monsters constantly mutated and tried to survive. If anything, it was one huge test area filled with deadly reagents that prompted released monsters to become stronger and more hideous. Seth had heard that some demons did so to cultivate materials for their experiments. It was callous, despicable, and disgustingly efficient. The demon just spawned a bunch of monsters, threw them out, and watched to see what happened. Do we have any information on dungeons in this place? Mike asked, doing his job as a party leader. Nope. The members of the Adventurer Guild that had knowledge of the layout of this place all died in the last expedition. I just keep looking for cave entrances. Seth doubted the demon would put any effort into expanding the dungeons or making anything special out of them. They were just monster spawners for him. Since Seth had the sight of Thea, he was able to see most details all around them at a far distance. This made him the scout of the party. With this kind of sight, it didn't take long to find the first dungeon. It was little more than a hole in the ground. Based on the magic aura it exuded, it was undeniably a dungeon entrance. Are you serious? Lixus asked, looking at the entrance. It was a narrow gorge that led straight down into a side of a cliff. The wind blowing out from the gorge answered Lixus with a mourning moan. It was far from what they knew as a dungeon entrance, since they should normally be at least wide enough for people to easily enter. Most dungeons had the courtesy to offer a staircase. I guess we should keep looking. There was no use raiding the dungeons the Maestro obviously didn't put any effort into. Looking on, there were quite a few dungeons that seemed to be barely dungeons. They were surrounded by groups of brainless beasts and kept exuding toxic fog, like the vents of a poison factory. We should keep going until we run into some of his subjects, Bulko suggested when Seth told them about the various simple caves and gorges he could spot with his vision. Thanks to Allison's potion they didn't suffer from the toxic nature of the place, but their mentality still took a hit looking at the dreary sight all day long. I have to say, that Maestro has a bad taste for someone who is supposedly an artist, Lixus commented after a while of trudging past the dark, muddy rocks. Brave words for someone wearing a tacky golden robe to battle, a voice commented snarkily. Slithering out from a crash below the sludge covering everything, was a black slime that took the shape of a toad, once outside of the crack. The toad looked at the group with its translucent sludge eyes. A quick check told Seth that the toad was not dangerous. Its attributes were 5 across the board and its only skill was sound transmission. What do you guys want? It asked, perched on a rock. Silence, everyone waited for Seth to answer. I'm speaking to the Maestro, I assume. My name is Pain Indias. What do you want? Yeah, I bet you are. Anyway, you have a little debt to pay for your ambush on our former base. We thought of collecting that today. So the other 2 groups of buffoons wandering haplessly through my experimental facilities also belong to you? Sure do. Seth didn't bother to squabble about them being buffoons. What kind of debt do I have to pay so you guys go away again? The toad asked with a sigh. Pain Indias was surprisingly cooperative, contrary to what his name would suggest. The blacksmith was sure it wasn't that easy, but he also knew that demons had always been sensible when it came to gains and losses. It was quite possible that the demon saw them as nothing more than an annoyance that had the potential to interrupt his work. In that matter, he might be a little like Seth. If the price was not too high, he would simply pay to get the flies to leave. We came for a little warm-up before we enter the abyss. Why don't you throw your strongest lab rats at us? Seth, the others asked surprised. Weren't they here to crush the Maestro? Ignoring them, he kept looking at the toad. His reasons were simple. Although most of these dungeons had been reconstructed to simply spit research subjects into this place, this wouldn't be the same for the dungeons he resided in personally. A demon who was practiced in dark magic, alchemy, enchantment, and who knew how much more. The kinds of traps and countermeasures that would wait for them could be hardly counted. If they could lure the beasts to the surface, it would be a lot safer. Haha. You want to go to the abyss? Fine, let's see what you can do. I will use you to get some research data. Don't blame me if you suffer. Pain suddenly answered incensed. Seth wondered what had happened for the demon to suddenly react like that while the toad already dissolved. The silence afterward didn't last for long as the vicinity was filled with a soft rumble. The blacksmith was able to see how an army of creatures emerged from the jagged gorges and caves. It was just he wished he had not seen it. Most of them seemed to be creatures made of humanoid monsters, but they were completely different from the chimeras as no single part stood out or were recognizable as they were modified with dark music and alchemy to an unrecognizable state. It didn't help that they moved in quick, choppy movements. The unnatural walk looked creepy, even with his improved dynamic vision. Black Walker Leave 89. The stats of the Black Walkers were also nothing to scoff at. Each could have been a boss in an ordinary dungeon. They were in a different league from the research subjects. The fact that they had a name suggested they were a research result. Guys, get ready. This could get a little difficult. Chapter 760. Please, can I have some more? Since they were facing a large group of enemies, their formation was rather loose. While Seth lifted Antares and took the role of the tank, protecting Bulko and Lixus in the back, while Mike, Mina, and Finn did their thing. As powerful as the monsters were, Seth felt almost bad when he saw them face off against the Chosen and Blessed armed with legendary items. Mike turned into his massive lion shape. Swinging his massive flaming sword, he could have looked majestic, but the curly horns of the helmet he kept using to crush skulls made him look a little funky. Mina was barely visible, even Seth only saw her as a flashing shadow, leaving behind beheaded bodies. And Finn was chaos to watch. The fairy had completely mastered her shape-shifting after becoming the Chosen of Bess. Like a superhero, she kept becoming tiny and massive, taking advantage of the shifting to dodge, weave and strengthen her punches. Even when the beasts had boss-like attributes and stats, they were only stronger than an Oath Guard in an epic armor. The three vanguards already had unfair advantages, but the elemental spells that hit the walkers once in a while really showed why mages were known as an asset on any battlefield. The Black Walkers had no mages on their side, an obvious oversight on the Maestro's part. Despite having a high magic resistance, Lix's spells humbled their resistances. Seth didn't do much more than block the ones that got through, while Bulko and Lixus did their job. The blacksmith felt a little bad for Bulko. His main job was healer, but currently, he could only act as a support for the others, using the support skills of his High Priest class and Mirror Priest class to strengthen the rest of the parts. Bulko had received the helmet of the Angel set, but it had not been completely awakened. The helmet's functions were still mostly in the air. With such an overpowered party, would Bulko feel redundant? Don't worry. I'm just glad they are safe, Bulko said. It seemed like the quarter giant had sensed Seth's worries. Once again, he proved his tremendous empathy. Despite his rough looks, he was a very sensible guy. Sometimes Seth envied the priest's high EQ. Rumble. The two who had not much to do looked up at the sound of breaking mountains and crumbling ravines. Like the rumbling of a thunderstorm, thunder shook the landscape. Breaking out from one of the narrow caves was a giant hand. The hand was gigantic, even bigger than the hand of a giant. Seth remembered the proportions of the giant he had met on their flight from the Theocracy. This was even bigger. Dark Composite Beast Leave 96. Fuck, that's a Colossus, he heard Finn curse. A Colossus? Seth had heard of giants, of titans, but what the heck was a Colossus? What the heck is a Colossus? What emerged from the depths of the earth was almost 100 meters tall, rivaling the size of Chrysopras, the stone giant. But this was something made of flesh and blood, covered in thick, dense fur. But it also had massive metallic insertions, that seemed like structural reinforcements that allowed the massive beast to stay together. Its face was hidden in a darkness, not even the eye's vision could pierce through. Seth could only see the glowing eyes, shining like massive lamps out from the darkness. The blacksmith wasn't one to talk, but what the heck had that crazy madman bolted together? It's a kind of rumored giant, but bigger, Bulko mumbled vaguely. The priest and the mages behind Seth were staring at the towering figure with incredulous expressions. Arim, this might be the time to bring out Python. Lixis suggested, not letting her eyes off the massive beast that was still standing up. What? Why? Things are just getting interesting. This should be a good chance to train our party play. Don't underestimate yourself, we can do this. Although Seth couldn't see through the darkness around the beast's face, he could see its stats and attributes, which were 1,200 through the board. It was a worthy boss for their party. I will be the tank, you guys do the damage. Seth called out to the others. Puffles, you protect the rearguard. You are really asking me to stay behind? You want Puffles, the mighty? Yes, I want Puffles the mighty to do the grunt work. Okay? I'm sure someone as great as you can shine no matter what role you play. Seth placated the Eyevisor as he rushed towards the dark composite beast. Seth also brought out Ounce and Gliobum. They were definitely able to create wonderful and captivating music. Their talent to be annoying was on a frighteningly different level. They were almost better to accompany him as a tank, than as a bard. The tunes they played made even Seth wish to slap them away. They were perfect to make the Colossus direct its ire at Seth. A tennis court-sized hand came down to crush the blacksmith like a bug. Antares increased in size and a shield appeared around Seth. When the hand crashed into the shield, Antares' thorns pierced into the hand. Although there was a massive size difference, Seth's durability made him the equivalent of a thumbtack, so the Colossus only hurt itself when slapping the tank. With a loud roar, it pulled back upon bleeding blood black like oil. The next moment, a massive firestorm enveloped the creature's head high above. This was not Seth at work, but Mike the massive lion with a golden man who had used this chance to charge up the arm of the Colossus. Shortly after, the Colossus suddenly started swaying. Looking up, the blacksmith just caught a glimpse of Mike having given the giant beasts a massive headbutt. Seeing the Colossus sway, Finn saw her chance. Taking the shape of a golden giant, she grappled the leg of the behemoth, like a toddler hugging the leg of her parent. However, this was a super strong toddler who seriously started to lift its parent's leg off the ground, making the bent over, swaying Colossus fall like a tree. When it tried to catch its fall with the unharmed hand, it simply slipped away under its weight. Lixis had not been idle and cast a swamp spell, an elemental combination magic of water and earth. It was the size of several football fields and gave a massive splash when the massive figure crashed into it with its full weight. Its face covered in mud and flames was suddenly covered in a dome of darkness. Mina saw her chance, with the opponent's head so close to the ground. Nobody saw what Mina did in there, but the Colossus was suddenly caught in a fight of erratic twitches and cramps and finally. Ding! You have killed Dark Composite Beast. Leave 96. Experience gained. Ding! You have leveled up. You are now leave 91. Silence followed. There were no more black walkers coming. The earth was not rumbling anymore. Everyone stared at Mina leaving the dark sphere and slowly walking towards the. Everyone gave it their all to face an epic boss battle, but the battle suddenly ended. Arim, Pain Indias? Are you done? We could take on a few more. Seth asked sheepishly.